Wendy, you'll take care of mommy and daddy's needs all by yourself. If you oppose, I'll divorce you and demand compensation. How could he think such an unreasonable demand would be acceptable? I was completely astounded as I looked at Steve. Steve stood defiantly, grinning at me. He must think I will accept his demands. Indeed, until now, I had complied with his requests for the sake of his parents, thinking it was for the best. I thought Steve's parents were good people, despite everything. But having seen the true nature of his mother, I felt neither worry nor sympathy anymore. I smiled back at Steve. All right then, let's get a divorce. Don't come crying to me later. Really, talking back to your husband. You're not fit to be a wife. Good riddance. A woman who chooses her job over my parents is unbelievable. Oh, my apologies then. Exactly. Even if I lose my job, I will prioritize mommy and daddy. I'm not heartless like you. Steve spoke with such pride. Then why didn't he take time off work now? Instead of pushing it onto me, he should just take a break and help his parents himself. By not doing so and just complaining, he's just passing the blame onto me. From now on, even if we see each other at the office, don't talk to me. I should have joined a different company. As Steve left, he made a point of saying this, finally causing my patience to snap. Then you're fired. What? Fired. What are you talking about? Have you gone crazy from the shock of the divorce? Laughing dismissively, I told Steve a truth he was unaware of. I am Wendy Adams, 40 years old. I run my own apparel company. I started the company when I was 26. Having lost my parents early in life, I set goals and focused on them to motivate myself. Decades later, I've lived solely for my work to stabilize my company's management. While my friends got married one after another, I had no boyfriend. I had no time to play. I traveled domestically and internationally for work. There were years I don't even remember taking a day off. Relatives and others often criticized me under the guise of concern. You better hurry up, or you won't be able to have children. Do you really enjoy working that much? Aren't you lonely? Arguing was futile as it only led to more nagging. I just smirked and quickly left such situations. Thanks to pouring most of my life into it, the company's performance has been on the rise. Finally, I was able to take regular breaks and started enjoying my personal life by the time I was 38. At that point, I wasn't particularly looking to get married, but I was open to having a good partner. That's when I met my husband, Steve. We met at a soccer match. A subordinate suggested I go to lighten up, and there I met Steve. Cheering for the same team, and we hit it off. After watching a few games together, we started going out, and then he asked me out. Steve was the same age as me but seemed much younger. He had many hobbies: watching baseball, playing video games, reading comics, playing golf, and he took me along to all of them. For me, who had never had time to play, spending time with Steve was very exciting and fun. Being 38 and having my first boyfriend, I honestly got a bit carried away. Then one day, Steve brought up something significant. Would you meet my parents? Huh? If I'm going to get married, it's going to be to you, Wendy. So, I want to properly introduce you to my parents. It had been about 2 months since we started dating. Though his sudden request surprised me. I always looked forward to our time together and couldn't find it in me to refuse. Things moved quickly from there, and a week later, we visited Steve's parents' house. Oh. My son is lucky to be dating such a lovely lady. Indeed. She's a wonderful girl. And it's the first time Steve has ever brought a girlfriend to meet us. He must be really smitten. Being praised so highly by his kind parents made me feel both happy and embarrassed. And I was blushing the whole time. Steve was grinning next to me, saying, right? Finding someone like her at 38 is a real catch. Although his words might sound harsh, Steve meant them as a compliment. With such wonderful parents, I felt we could get along well after marriage. I was relieved that the meeting went smoothly. However, something that slightly bothered me was that Steve referred to his parents as mommy and daddy. It was a calling style I hadn't often heard from adult men in my circle, and it initially shocked me. But I figured it was just a difference between families. And it would be wrong of me to feel disgusted, so I tried not to mind it. Steve must be very close with his parents. Throughout our conversation, he often praised his mother excessively. While it was endearing, some parts were a bit jarring. For example, when the conversation turned to home cooking. Wendy, what kind of dishes do you cook well? I'm not sure if I would call it a specialty, but I often make a simple meal. At this, Steve excitedly chimed in.
Yeah.
She makes things like meat and potato stew and other simmered dishes. They're edible, but when compared to mommy's cooking. Oh. This is perfect. Why don't you teach her some recipes? I understood that the taste of his mother's cooking was what he was accustomed to. However, such comments made me feel conflicted. Regardless of how I felt, Steve's mother seemed pleased. Oh. Then I must put together a recipe book for Steve's sake, she said, looking delighted. As we were about to leave after such events, a shocking truth came out when his parents asked, "When are you getting married?" Steve's casual reply made my eyes widen. I'd marry right now if I could. It'd make life easier too. Being a part-timer really makes the income tight. What? Part-timer? I remembered that when I first met Steve, I had asked about his job. And he had vaguely responded with something like sales. I had been vague too, only mentioning that I worked in apparel, and after all, we were still just getting to know each other. Everyone has things they don't want to talk about. I figured we could discuss it more once we were closer. I had completely forgotten about it, but to think he was a part-timer. Stunned, I listened as Steve frowned and explained. What's with that look? Thinking at 38, no less? But listen, there's a deep reason for this. Apparently, Steve's mother had always been frail and prone to illness. 2 years ago, his father had fallen ill and needed care. At the time, Steve had been working in sales at a steel company but quit to care for his father, switching to freelance work for its flexibility. It's tough on mommy alone, right? I just wanted to be there for my parents. If it meant staying a part-timer, then so be it. Steve glanced at his parents and nodded. Lately, both mommy and daddy have been in good health. So I'm thinking about getting a job again. I've got to do my best for us, Wendy, so we can get married. Steve. I felt ashamed of myself for being disappointed upon hearing he was a part-timer. Steve prioritized his parents over his job. What a kind and warm-hearted person he is. Then, he mentioned reconsidering employment for my sake. After our previous conversation, I thought about it for a bit and then made a suggestion to Steve. If you're interested, why don't you try applying to my company? What? Work at the same company as you? Yes. It's a different field, but you were originally in sales, right? We just happen to be looking for someone in sales right now. I meant well with my suggestion, but Steve visibly disliked the idea. If I'm going to work, I prefer somewhere I can earn well. I want to make mommy feel secure. Did it look like I wasn't earning enough? I explained again about our company. While showing him the job site, I mentioned that the company has a revenue of about $500 million. And the salary and holidays are about this much. I also told him about other benefits. Steve, looking steadily at the site, began to warm up to the idea. This might not be too bad after all. And with that, he applied to a job posting at my company. Luckily, we were looking to significantly increase our sales staff at the time. So Steve was hired without issue. Pressured somewhat by his parents, we went ahead and registered our marriage. Who would have thought we'd end up working at the same company? Really? By the way, which department are you in? Steve still thought of it as just the company I work for. He had no idea that I was the owner. It wasn't something I meant to keep secret, but it felt awkward to bring it up. And I hadn't mentioned it. Seeing a good opportunity, I was nervous but decided to tell him the truth. Actually. Before I could finish, Steve interrupted with something unbelievable. Well, whatever. I'll probably quit soon anyway. What? What does he mean by that? I had a bad feeling about this. Steve glanced at me and smirked in a way I had never seen before. I shuddered involuntarily. What? Got a complaint? No, it's not a complaint. What do you mean? I have no plans to quit my job now. Oh, unless we have kids? But our company offers maternity and paternity leave. Kids are out of the question. Daddy and Mommy take up all my time. Dad and Mom? I tilted my head, and Steve mockingly did the same. My parents, remember? I told you they need care. Your father, right? I heard about that. But you said he's been doing well lately. That's why you re-entered the workforce, right? Even if they're doing well, they're still old, aren't they? Aren't you worried? Or what? Are you planning to neglect your duties as a daughter-in-law? I was confused and didn't understand what Steve was getting at. I needed a moment to calm down and sort things out. Steve was planning to push the care of his parents onto me. And from the way he spoke, it seemed he eventually intended to have me quit my job to prioritize caregiving. I'm not saying you should quit right away. It helps to have two incomes. But from now on, we'll be going back to my parents' place on our days off. What is that supposed to mean? I wasn't completely unprepared for caregiving. I had intended to help and thought I could be of support in the future. But I had never imagined being sent back to my in-laws every holiday. And eventually being pushed to take over caregiving duties. What surprised me most was Steve's attitude. Before we got married, he was positive and reliable. But as soon as we were married, he changed completely. Is this really the same Steve I knew? I can't believe it. I didn't get married to be with someone like this. I wanted to close my eyes tightly and escape from reality. But Steve's angry voice relentlessly echoed. Listen, you are my wife. Don't oppose me. Understand. I was so taken aback by his change that I could neither deny nor confirm it. If I had known this would happen, I would not have gotten married. The thought of divorce immediately came to mind. Societally, getting a divorce so soon after marriage might look bad. But more than that, I felt it was a waste of time to spend with someone unpleasant. I prepared the divorce papers right away. The problem was the reason for the divorce and his parents. The reason for divorce could be managed. If necessary, I could involve a lawyer. But more problematic were his parents. As Steve had declared, we visited his parents' house every holiday. I was reluctant to go to his parents' house because Steve treated me poorly. However, every time we visited, his parents were excessively pleased. I'm sorry to bother you on your day off, coming to a place like this. No, not at all. You're working too, and I do feel sorry about it. But you see, Steve is our only son. When you come, it feels like having a daughter, and it makes us so happy. Her tearful joy made it impossible for me to dismiss her. Every time I visited, she prepared sweets that she knew I liked. and her consideration was deeply felt. Although I hated being commanded by Steve, if it made his mother happy. I found myself unable to bring up divorce, and time passed. 2 months after we got married, Steve and I started visiting his parents separately. Simply put, our holidays did not align anymore. Initially, I had made adjustments to accommodate Steve. By the way, I still hadn't told him that I was the president of the company. Given how Steve was now, I felt it would only complicate things if he knew. Though it could easily be discovered upon investigation, fortunately, Steve seemed unaware. Steve was a problem not only as a husband but also as an employee. I wanted to resolve the internal issues quickly and get a divorce. But what about his mother? She had been so kind, I didn't want to upset her. With this dilemma, I headed to his parents' house as usual. Recently, I had started entering his parents' home without waiting to be invited. Today, as usual, I opened the front door and took off my shoes. That's when I heard a familiar voice from inside. It was definitely Steve's voice. He was supposed to be at work today, maybe there was a change. Feeling somewhat awkward, I proceeded down the hallway and was about to enter the living room, when I stopped upon hearing the conversation. She really doesn't catch on, does she? Her housekeeping is subpar. She's serious, but couldn't you have found someone better? The voice was definitely that of the mother-in-law. However, the way she spoke was so mean-spirited that I could hardly believe it. It was as if a different person was speaking. So much so that it sounded like a character from a soap opera. But it was indeed the voice of the mother-in-law. After all the praise she had for me, it was hard to believe such a gentle mother-in-law could say such things. My heart squeezed tight. I didn't want to hear any more, but my feet felt too heavy to move. Sorry, Mommy. But you know, she's tall, so if needed, she can carry you. With a bit more training, she'll be more useful. Well, for now, she's pleasant and does provide financial help, so I suppose it's okay. I'm expecting potential for the future. Steve and his mother laughed as they spoke freely. Listening to their conversation, my heart pounded loudly. These two were talking about me. While Steve's usual complaints were one thing, the hidden face of the mother-in-law shocked me. She always thanked me so much that I felt embarrassed. We would laugh together while eating sweets and often cooked together. Regardless of Steve's intentions, I thought I was on good terms with my mother-in-law. I had been holding off on divorce because I was concerned about her. Yet, from what I heard of their conversation, I was completely just a caregiving tool to her. Furthermore, my mother-in-law added insult to injury by saying this. For now, I just praise her and butter her up. She looks so foolishly happy when I do that. Steve, you should learn from me. It's like they say, even a fool and scissors have their uses. Hearing those words, I fled from my in-laws' house as if escaping. After calming myself down a bit, I contacted Steve and his parents. I'll be busy for a while, so I can't meet or contact you. I will reach out again later. I ignored the multiple calls from Steve and his parents. Steve's yelling was even recorded on the answering machine. Do you think it's okay to trouble Mommy like that? Go apologize to her in person right now. You have no right to refuse. As if anyone would comply with that. Naturally, I ignored it. At work, I made sure not to run into Steve, and I started staying at a hotel after work. During this time, I steadily prepared for divorce. Then, one day when preparations were fairly in order, I was unfortunately spotted by Steve, who had been waiting for me at work. Hey, Wendy. As soon as he saw me, he seemed about to grab me, but he held back. Probably because of the people around. I moved to an empty conference room to talk with Steve. I've been looking for you. What are you doing? I called you so many times. Do you have any idea how much I've been searching for you? Steve seemed furious. His breath was rough, and his eyes bloodshot as he glared at me hatefully. He stomped into the room and approached me. Then, standing in front of me, he suddenly grabbed my wrist. Let go. I told you over the phone. I'll contact you when I've calmed down. Is there anything more important than my daddy and mommy? Do you know how lonely you've made them feel? Lonely? They were talking badly about me together, and he has the nerve to say that? I trembled with anger. I wanted to shut him up right there and then. I wanted to hurl every insult I could think of at him. But I was too agitated to speak properly, so I just clenched my teeth and glared back at him. Taking my silence for acquiescence, Steve continued. Poor them. Look, they're hungry now and they have nothing to eat. Forget work today, just go back home right now. As if he had any right to direct my work. We're not children, and it's not like they can't move around. They need to stop being so dependent. I shook off Steve's hand and shouted. I have an important meeting coming up today. There's no way I can take off for something like this. If it's so important, you should take a day off and go yourself. There's no reason I should have to sacrifice so much. Why should I throw away important work for these people? Steve probably didn't expect me to fight back. He stumbled backward for a moment. You're talking back to me. A wife's place. I've always thought this, but aren't your values a bit off? What do you mean a wife's place? They're your parents, right? Shouldn't you handle it yourself before pushing it onto me? Today, Steve's work was just making documents and having meetings inside the office. The document preparation could be done another day, and if he asked around, rescheduling the meetings wouldn't be too troublesome. If his mother is so important, he should be the one to take a break. His refusal to do so just shows what little importance they hold for him. Yet, he tries to control me, blaming me at his convenience. What a convenient mama's boy. It's absolutely ridiculous. What? That's ridiculous. Why should I have to apologize and take time off work to clean up your mess, wife? Clean up? What are you talking about? Let's get this straight once and for all. Listen up. Since you married into this family, taking care of my parents is your job. If you can't do that, you're worthless as a wife. Steve said all this in one breath, huffing and puffing out his chest as if to intimidate. Was he trying to act like some kind of tough guy? He looked like a little kid pretending to be the boss. Not scary at all. What even is the value of a wife in his terms? Why do I have to be evaluated? So, what exactly are you asking of me? I asked with a sigh, and Steve snorted in response. You'll take care of mommy and daddy's needs all by yourself. If you oppose, I'll divorce you and demand compensation. Can he really think such an absurd demand will work? I was completely astounded looking at Steve, but he stood defiantly, grinning at me. He must think I will accept his demands, because I've grown fond of my mother-in-law. Indeed, until now, I had complied with his requests for the sake of his parents, thinking it was for the best. Despite everything, I thought his parents were good people. But having seen the true nature of his mother, I felt neither worry nor sympathy anymore. I smiled back at Steve. All right then, let's get a divorce. Huh? Steve sounded utterly shocked. Do you even understand what you're saying? Yes, I do. I can't be the wife you want, so let's divorce, shall we? If you want to demand compensation, go ahead. Whether I'll pay is another matter though. I pulled the divorce papers from my bag and handed them to Steve. I had kept them handy since I had been contemplating divorce. Are you serious? Do you even understand what you're doing? Yes, I do. Now sign it quickly. Steve was stunned for a moment, unable to believe it. Seeing his hesitation, I said, "Oh, are you not divorcing? Just all talk, then?" That made him flush with anger and furiously sign the papers. After checking the completed documents, everything was indeed filled out properly. I confirmed everything and immediately handed them to my secretary to file. "So, we're strangers now," I said it matter-of-factly, and Steve spat out as if he was disgusted. "Don't come crying to me later." "Really? Talking back to your husband, you're not fit to be a wife. Good riddance. A woman who chooses her job over my parents is unbelievable." "Oh, my apologies then." "Exactly. Even if I lose my job, I will prioritize mommy and daddy. I'm not heartless like you." Steve spoke with such pride. Then why didn't he take time off work now? Instead of pushing it onto me, he should just take a break and help his parents himself. By not doing so and just complaining, he's just passing the blame onto me. From now on, even if we see each other at the office, don't talk to me. I should have joined a different company. As Steve was leaving, he made a point of saying this, finally causing my patience to snap. "Then you're fired." It was probably the coldest voice I've ever used. Steve stopped in his tracks and turned around, saying, "What? Fired? What are you talking about? You're not even my boss. Did the shock of the divorce drive you mad?" Steve laughed dismissively. He must think this is all a joke. I sighed quietly and stared him down. Our eyes met, and Steve flinched, looking anxious. He was bracing for what I would say next. I took a deep breath and said calmly, "The strange one is you. Don't you even know the face of the president of your own company?" "What? No, that can't be." Steve twitched the corners of his mouth, then pulled out his smartphone and started looking something up. As he stared at his phone, the color drained from his face. He must have finally realized who I really am. "You're the president of this company? You finally understand, don't you?" Steve knelt down and apologized to me. His voice trembled pitifully. "It's not like that, Wendy. I didn't know." "Didn't know?" "No, you just didn't bother to find out, did you?" "I never brought it up, but there were plenty of opportunities to know. Just like now, a quick search on his smartphone would have shown. Even if not a photo, at least the name. That's Steve for you. He probably didn't even care. He's not particularly dedicated to his work. All he cares about are earnings and time off. That's why his work performance is subpar. To you, I was just another insignificant person. All you and your parents wanted was a diligent, hardworking wife. Anyone would do as long as they took care of the caregiving, right?" Steve opened and closed his mouth, shaking his head, his face pale. "That's not true. If I had known you were the president, I wouldn't have made you do caregiving. Instead, I would have taken care of mommy and daddy and let you focus on your work. With enough money, you can hire someone. You would have had me earn the money, hired professionals for the caregiving. And you would have just enjoyed your life." Steve gave a faint smile and muttered softly, "I wouldn't do something that awful." That's right, if Steve had managed things better, that might have been a possible future. If he had proposed like he used to entertain me before we were married, without any doubts, I would have agreed. "I'll earn the money, and you focus on caregiving," I would have said it wholeheartedly. If only Steve and his parents hadn't changed after marriage, that could have been a viable future. Steve blew that chance himself. Steve looked up at me pleadingly. His eyes seemed almost tearful. "Please, Wendy. Can we start over? We used to get along so well. Let's go places together again." Please. Please. Indeed, you always took me places I didn't know about. Everywhere you took me was fun. A glimmer of hope shone on Steve's face. Right? So then. But that was just you playing nice to get married. Life with you after the marriage has been very disappointing. That's. I wonder if the divorce papers have been processed by now. Anyway, I have to prepare for a meeting. I'll contact you about the dismissal. You can go home for today. I gathered my belongings and waved casually at Steve, then reached for the door to leave. But before I could open it, Steve grabbed my left hand. Turning back, I saw Steve glaring at me. I glared back and asked simply, "Is there something else?" Something else? This isn't over. Divorce just decided like that, then you're the president. And now I'm fired? How can I accept that? You're being totally unreasonable. The divorce was your idea, not mine. You didn't think I'd actually agree to it. And you should have told me you were the president. Steve apparently intended to use the divorce to control me, thinking it would make me comply. It must have shocked him to learn I was the president. Blaming others, such behavior isn't becoming of an adult. It's unreasonable for me to set everything up for him, yet he never questions that. Steve has just been blaming others his whole life. I'm so appalled, I'm at a loss for words. Steve is clenching his back teeth tightly. He seems to regret having lost his cash cow, but that's none of my concern. Isn't that just too selfish? You were the one who was unplanned and ignorant. Yet you shift the blame. That's not right. At my words, Steve's face turned red, and he shouted in a strangled voice. Coward. It's unacceptable for the president of a major corporation to fire employees. For personal gain. No. This tyranny can't be allowed. Convinced he's right and trying to turn the situation around, Steve puffs out his chest towards me. His thinking is too childish. Does he always believe he's in the right? Even after all I've said, can't he take any of it seriously? I inadvertently held my head in my hands. Seeing this, Steve smiled triumphantly, thinking he had won. See? I hit the nail on the head, didn't I? Should I bring this to light? Because you'd be the one in trouble. You're too foolish for words. If anything comes to light, it'll be you who's in trouble, won't it? What are you talking about, me? I cut off Steve's words and started reading off names. Ms. Simpson from General Affairs, Ms. Ross from Sales, Ms. Morris. Then, Ms. Hill from Accounting. Who else was there? I looked at Steve for an answer, and he began to sweat, his eyes darting around. What are you talking about? You know very well. I just listed the names of the female employees you've persistently pursued. They've been consulting me about it. Most employees don't know that Steve is my husband. Only my secretary is aware. And yet, this is the kind of consultation that has come to me. I've been bothered by repeated advances from Steve from sales. At first, I couldn't believe my ears. My own husband was hitting on several young female employees. And upon listening more closely, it turns out he kept pursuing them despite their rejections. I was embarrassed and sorry beyond words. I was just trying to deepen interactions as fellow employees. Targeting only female employees who are over 10 years younger? You even invited them to a hotel. What kind of interaction were you planning to deepen? There's also evidence in the form of messages Steve sent to these female employees. No matter what Steve says, there's no escaping it. Your performance isn't good, and you're a nuisance to other employees. Removing detrimental individuals from the company is part of a president's job, isn't it? But, yes, and there's also a report from accounting suggesting you might be fudging expenses. What about that? You wouldn't be doing something so petty, would you? Steve looked away and fell silent. Unfortunately, it seems that accusation is true too. A mama's boy who loves women and is stingy. And on top of that, he causes trouble for others besides me, not just as a husband but as a person. I'm disappointed in my own lack of judgment. It's embarrassing that I couldn't see through someone like him. I'll clarify all suspicions before firing you, so don't worry. Well, I have to leave now. You get along with your parents at your parents' house. Steve collapsed on the spot. He slumped over, mumbling something. He must have finally realized it was all too late. Even as I put my hand on the room's door, thankfully he said nothing more. And I left Steve there deflated and walked out. Later on, investigations confirmed all suspicions about Steve. After making him apologize to the female employees, he resigned on his own to take responsibility. Now unemployed, Steve went back to live at home with his parents. After a while, Steve tried to start working again as a part-timer. But something unexpected happened. Until now, even though my former father-in-law required care, my former mother-in-law had been able to manage most of the daily tasks on her own. Thanks to this, Steve only had to help occasionally. However, his mother began showing signs of dementia. She would wander off at night. Now, with a physically needy father and a mother who was mostly okay, but occasionally showed signs of dementia, it was a different story. I have no peace of mind. I'm running out of money. Help me. Steve called asking for help, saying he was at his limit. If the divorce had been amicable and there had been no hard feelings with his former in-laws, I might have helped. But these were the people who looked down on me as just a caregiver. No sympathy there. It sounds difficult, but there's nothing I can do to help. Moreover, now that we are strangers, please refrain from further contact. Depending on the situation, I may take appropriate action. After that, I didn't hear from Steve again. After divorcing Steve, I thought I'd had enough of marriage and decided to live alone. However, just as I had settled on that thought, someone I had known through work for many years confessed to me. Traumatized by Steve, I considered refusing. But knowing this person's sincerity and having a long acquaintance, I gratefully accepted his offer to date. Whether it leads to marriage, I'm not sure. And I'm half doubting whether it might turn out badly after marriage again. But this person is the most gentle I've ever met. Also, being a company owner himself, we have work in common. Unlike with Steve, this person is truly a partner. If I can spend my future with him, perhaps this happiness will last. Hoping for such a future, I continue to work hard every day.